Thank you. Hello, everyone. I thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference and giving me the opportunity to talk to you about safeguarding heritage, especially in the digital domain during times of conflict. I'm a senior program leader at ICCROM, which is an intergovernmental organization dedicated to promoting conservation of cultural heritage worldwide. I train cultural first aiders, people who have the ability to work with other humanitarian actors and local communities and document, evacuate, salvage, as well as stabilize endangered heritage during and after complex emergencies induced by conflicts and disasters. And as the war rages on in Ukraine, I would like to share some of my experiences in the field to highlight the challenges as well as moral and ethical dilemmas involved in safeguarding heritage amidst violence, displacement, and loss. The first case that I would like to share with you today is that of a cultural first aider who, after receiving ICCROM and Aleppo training, is striving to safeguard this photo archive in Dhamar Governorate. It's not only a photo archive, it also has recordings in Dhamar Governorate in Yemen. The archive contains recordings of traditionally sung poems owned by a family that has been transmitting this tradition locally. Traditionally sung poems constitute an important part of Yemen's memory and its identity. These recordings have great historical value and form a part of the popular culture. These poems also hold artistic value for present and future generations. The recordings are captured in over 10,000 audio cassettes, and the building in which they are stored needs urgent repair. Moreover, for the conflicting parties, this heritage holds messages and meanings which contradict their own conflict ideology, as well as narratives of the past that they have constructed. Therefore, this heritage is really at the risk of being targeted and destroyed in the ongoing war in Yemen. In summary, the heritage that I have described is recorded in an obsolete format. It is undocumented and not on the radar of the national heritage authorities, needs digitization and a secure digital repository. Last but not the least, a qualified audiovisual archivist is not available in Yemen, and this archivist could actually help plan a participatory digitization project, customize metadata standards, develop a priority list for digitization, and undertake preventive care for the collection, which is in a dilapidated condition. So my question is, what can be done in such a situation where resources are scarce and taking action on heritage could lead to further conflict or misappropriation of local culture? So we really need to think about this issue. The second example that I would like to share with you is from northern Iraq. After the liberation of Mosul in early 2017, in collaboration with some other partners, institutions, I was invited to undertake an assessment mission and advise Iraqi archaeologists on methods and tools for conducting post-event damage and risk documentation. At the time, several initiatives were ongoing that were using remote technologies, such as satellite imagery and drones, to monitor various sites in the conflict affected regions. However, the archaeologists that I met were from the State Board of Antiquities. They had learned scanning techniques for digital documentation, but they had no scanners, cameras, no laptops, little or no funds. Um, Moreover, their task was especially challenging as they had to assess and document damage at vast archaeological sites such as Nimrud, which you can see on the screen, that were heavily mined. And in order to reach such sites, they had to pass through various security checkpoints, some of which were controlled by hostile militia. Here, there are several points that deserve attention. A key aspect is a general lack of coordination and cooperation for sharing information and technologies when and where they are most needed. While several civil and military institutions had up to date satellite imagery for Iraq, the cultural heritage professionals on the ground could have used it to ensure personal safety and security, as well as prioritize areas according to likely damage. Yet, they did not have access to this. A related issue is the lack of general understanding among professionals as well as donor institutions about tools and technologies required to conduct rapid needs assessments, which can be carried out remotely. Similarly, there is a distinction between post event damage and risk documentation and a more detailed condition assessment, which typically precedes physical intervention. But there is little understanding of which technology is to be used at what stage of emergency response. Equally important and a neglected issue is the availability of security personnel to demine and safely dispose of unexploded ordinances before heritage sites can be inspected by professionals and volunteers. The next case example that I would like to cite is from Aleppo in Syria, where a cultural first aider who was trained by ICCROM trained young engineers and architects to collect pre-war documentation from various sources and use photogrammetry to build 3D models of damaged buildings to facilitate the restoration and to build the memory of the historic city as it was before the war. 16 professionals were trained in the first phase of this project, and then in turn, they trained 16 others, creating a group of 32 trained professionals who systematically documented the buildings of local significance in the historic city. They also learned how to provide first aid and stabilize these damaged buildings. The documentation dossiers that they built were shared with departments, the government departments, such as the Department of Tourism and the Department of Museums and Antiquities systematically. Now, we all know that there were international projects and prominent, high profile international projects undertaken to document and restore sites in Syria. However, heritage that was of local significance did not make it to the priority list of the donors. And this is at the crux of the problem. While donors are mostly interested in listed heritage of national and international significance, In the recent wars, we have seen large-scale destruction of all forms of heritage, ranging from oral histories, languages, traditions, archives, museums, libraries to buildings, cities, and entire cultural landscapes. Therefore, what we lack is an overall strategy as well as capacity for systematic post-event documentation of the damages and losses incurred by the entire heritage sector of a country. So we have to widen our scope here and widen, also enhance capacities. And what does enhancing capacities means? Enhancing capacities for sector-wide documentation would include standardized and customized open source tools that can be shared with other sectors as well, trained professionals who can work with different types of heritage and different types of actors, as well as sustain funding. Building on these insights we have gained from our network, ICCROM is now striving to develop a systematic approach for first aid and recovery of all forms of cultural heritage in Ukraine in coordination with local and other international partners. ICCROM has been training professionals in the region since 2014. Through ICCROM's First Aid and Resilience program that I lead, my team is closely working with Ihor Poshivelo, who is the director of the Maidan Museum, and also a cultural first aider and founder of HERI, Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, which is an NGO supported by the Ministry of Culture and Informational Policy of Ukraine. In order to facilitate a sector-wide and systematic approach to emergency response, which includes emergency documentation, we have shared guidance which has been translated into Ukrainian, and these are some of our widely translated handbooks and toolkits, which also have dedicated tools for emergency documentation of heritage, and especially built and movable heritage, and as well as intangible heritage. Through an online workshop, which was attended by 79 professionals from different parts of Ukraine, we have introduced damage and risk assessment forms, which were field tested and customized by HERI. At the same time, we gave a short security training with the help of military personnel on types of explosives, ordinances that people may encounter while accessing heritage sites in areas directly affected by the conflict. Next steps involve putting these forms that we have developed, and they have been translated into Ukrainian, on an app. We will be customizing an open source data gathering app used by humanitarians, and this will ensure interoperability of the data gathered. It will also help the Ukrainian government to define priorities for immediate action, assess the damage and loss in terms of livelihoods, infrastructure and resources, losses of income, as well as physical damage to heritage, estimates cost for its recovery, and include these costs in post-conflict needs assessment that will be carried out by World Bank and the European Union. This kind of assessment will also facilitate risk-informed decision-making, thus enabling efficient use of resources. Moreover, Ukrainian institutions will own the data, and they can choose how and when to provide access to information to outside actors. And here I would like to flag another issue, an important and a critical one. Often sensitive data in a crisis situation is gathered by external agencies and rarely fully shared with the country in a responsible manner. We have seen this happen in Iraq, we have seen this happen in Libya, in Syria, and let's make sure that this does not happen in Ukraine. Very important questions to consider. When we are helping out, who owns the data? Who shares the ownership? Where to save it? Do we have secure, trusted digital repositories? Who has access? How do we repatriate these digital assets? And how to avoid cultural appropriation or commoditization, which we see happening rampantly and often with communities that are displaced. We see in the name of safeguarding heritage or documenting intangible heritage, we have seen commoditization happening and commercialization of that. So that has to be avoided. And this is a real ethical as well as a moral challenge that we have to overcome together. And it means developing participatory documentation projects in times of conflicts. In times of conflict. In conclusion, I would like to highlight that as a sector, we really need to systematically review and assess our capacities to protect existing documentation and understand whether we can access it digitally in a crisis situation. There is also an added challenge of security. So, how to share information with whom? This is, as I've already highlighted, an important issue. Moreover, in every country, we need to enhance capacities for post-event documentation. This includes developing standardized tools and schema for example, we all have heard about, sorry, I should move forward. We all have heard about object ID as a standard for museum collections, for documenting museum collections. But let me ask, if anyone among us has to evacuate a museum collection within a couple of hours, which fields of object ID we could include to describe the objects evacuated? Which fields we would include? Have we thought about this? Similarly, I would like to ask how many among the audience, although I realize that this is a post-lunch period and there may not be many people around, how many among the audience have actually developed a form for documenting damage and risk to a collection in the aftermath of a critical incident or an emergency? Here, I would like to underscore that post-event damage and need assessments are standard procedure within the humanitarian practice. But in our field, it's a rarity. It helps to provide quick sector-wide scan of the response and recovery needs. And therefore, every institution should think about developing such documentation or such, before, in preparedness, rather than after, a critical event or a crisis has occurred. Finally, I would like to highlight, for enhancing capacities for post-event emergency documentation, we need ready-to-share georeference inventories for movable, immovable, and intangible heritage assets. We need trained professionals, emergency responders, and community members who can record damage and assess immediate needs. We need tested systems for and tested as well as automated systems for gathering, visualizing, and analyzing post-event data. We need better integration with national and international emergency management systems, because our ability to reach heritage sites during a widespread crisis is very limited. Last but not the least, we need international trusted digital repositories where sensitive information and data can be stored, without the fear of a security breach and without the fear of diluting ownership, and and making sure that the ownership is retained by institutions or the individuals contributing data. And with that, I would like to end my talk, and I invite your comments. Thank you very much. Our motto is culture cannot wait. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for giving me your attention.
Thank you, Aparna, for this post-launch presentation. It's a little bit sobering to hear indeed how we've discussed about how we struggle in normal circumstances to document collections, but indeed when you're dealing with post-conflict or post-crisis situation, the challenges only increase. And I would like to open the floor for questions. Are there? Yes, I see a hand. Do we have a mic on the second line?
A quick question. Does ICCROM have operations or plans for operations in Afghanistan?
Yes. Okay. Well, we are not as such plans. As I said, ICCROM is a capacity development organization, so we are closely working with the colleagues in National Museum of Afghanistan, and during the current, again, the fresh outbreak of war there, first concern was to make sure that some of the colleagues that we were working with were able to find safe places, because many of them wanted to get out of the country, especially the women professionals who were at the risk of being targeted. We are now working, and it's going on very slowly because the challenges are, again, getting funding into Afghanistan. There was an overall embargo. And now we are working with Aleppo Foundation to help maintain a storage at the site of the Bamiyan Buddhas, as well as train Afghan participants. But all of this is very low-key, and it is fraught with dangers and security issues. So yes, we are working, but quite in a low-profile manner, I would say.
Great, thank you, Aparna, for this potential growth of the aid towards another region. Are there other questions in the room? I see some hands underneath the table. I have a question, actually. You have mentioned, Aparna, there's a number of challenges. You point to the coordination and the cooperation on international level, and you say that there are perhaps not enough tools, and there are some tools in other sectors, but perhaps not applied. I am one of those hopeless optimists that look at digital technology as an opportunity to improve. You mentioned that we could. You call for the need for an international repository of digital information, and you also mentioned that there are satellite images and a number of things available to help the work. So if I were to tap into your more optimistic side, what do you see are the potential areas of development or tools that we could perhaps start using to assist some of these sites with the assistance of digital technology?
Okay, well, so I think the point is that digital technologies we can use in almost every phase of an emergency response, right up to recovery. And it's just that understanding that which technologies could be used where and optimized it at what time. So I think the first thing where an area of cooperation or potential area of cooperation is really in making sure that if we have satellite imagery and good satellite imagery, this information is shared through if they're like a private university is doing this, or if a military organization is doing this. So making sure that we talk to our governments enough that this imagery is made available to professionals on the ground. So it's not about negative, it's a gap. And the gap exists because cultural heritage is not seen or is not fully included in international as well as national emergency response systems, and it is not seen as a priority. So I think what is needed is this kind of cooperation in understanding. Then the other area where we can really benefit is the search and rescue teams when they get on ground, or when militaries get on ground and they do clearance operations. They have detailed maps. They're using GIS. They are using sophisticated drones, and they get very quickly, they capture the first image of how a place is looking like after it has been struck by a bomb or by an extreme hazard event. And that image or those kind of pictures and maps are critical for us, for heritage people who come after, to understand the disaster topography, so as to speak, to understand the lay of the land, where things have landed, where things could have flown and gone. If a building has, I've been in disaster situations where it's been very difficult to find like a building part which may have flown into another site. So this really helps in understanding and salvaging and saving costs later on. So there is a area of cooperation there. Then again, about 3D scanners and photogrammetry and all these tools are there, they are available. But what happens is that often, like for example, now in Ukraine, the software compatibility is not there. Operatives on the ground do not have, even the ability to open some of the images, drone images or other things given to them. They're not in the formats that they can be open. So it's about making these things available, and it's not about per se technology or not technology. It's just that there is a gap of capacities. So this is what needs to be looked at. So we are really very much focused in research, but we are not focused on making sure that a nation, when it's struck by a disaster, its heritage department, its professionals have the necessary tools to also take in, make use of open source technologies, or make use of images, or, a wide variety of formats from other institutions. So that's what I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thank you. So that sounds indeed, you're supporting the previous statements that there are some tools available, there is knowledge available, but somehow this is not integrated into the national in the national strategies and in the cultural heritage institutions. You mentioned, so the International Center for the Study of Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property, the ICCROM, that you are representing. So you guys are supporting, if I understand correctly, the application of this past experience to support that new situations are handled different. So do you see actually any changes right now happening with the handling of Ukraine? I know it's too late already to start, devising the strategies for future crisis, but do you see already any changes in the strategy of how, for instance, ICCROM or the international assistance could come into Ukraine?
Well, on a more positive note, for Ukraine, there has been much more solidarity and coordination. And very early on in the process, UNESCO has been calling these inter-partner meetings. And I must praise the Ukrainians here because, as I said, we have been working with them since 2014. And they are more prepared as compared to some of the other countries recent in the region that I have mentioned now. And that credit goes to, of course, the professionals and the way they have stayed together. There is also an extraordinary cooperation amongst Ukrainian cultural institutions, and they are so I think in a way a lot depends on the host country and their capacity to respond to a crisis situation. So they have handled it very well so far, and they are better prepared, and there is a level of governance, because normally in a conflict situation, governments are the first one to fall apart, and especially in internal conflict situations. So again, this is a invasion situation where a country has been invaded, and the country and its government has remained to some extent available and together for mounting a response, official response. And that, I think, is a crucial factor here. We must differentiate it from other countries and other situations.
That sounds really hopeful. Thank you. And then I'm looking, so the core activities of ICCROM are indeed, as you mentioned, the advocacy, cooperation, research, information, and training. And now I can't look at the questions, but let me look online here on my computer. There was a question actually about how, well, actually two questions. Okay, I'll read it. How much support do you get from the governments of these countries when carrying out these assessments and documentation? And then my part of the question that I wanted to add to this is, you mentioned training. Is this training in the preservation, or is this also training in terms of governance and in terms of strategies for other things?
Well, both. Because there is a difference. We offer training in crisis, and when we do offer in crisis training, then, for example, after the blast in Beirut, immediately after, the Department of Antiquities had to set up a strategy and an office to mount response. And at that time, at their request, we advise them on how to strategize and set up a response and get in touch with various agencies. So we also help our member states, because as I mentioned, it's an intergovernmental organization. So we do get specific requests from member states for intervention. And that's when we, really can, without the invitation, we cannot intervene. And the other aspect is that our responses obviously become better where we have our network or where we have trained personnel, because training really does help. If it is done in peace times, it's much better. So if I have to give out a key message through this platform, is that CIDOC must consider integrating emergency training as a part of its mandate. And the fantastic work that this committee is doing, I think it will be further enhanced if you also integrate some sort of emergency training, whether online or in person, as part of your mandate.
Yeah, thank you, Aparna. So we're working on that. And so you mentioned something on the role of the governments and how governments maybe contribute with this. And there's another question in the online from the online users about, is there a list of actions which can be taken in crisis situations? Obviously not before, but actually after. Obviously before incident is important, but what sort of things can place, and I'm looking at your website and the resources, and I don't spot them right away.
Okay, oh yes, that's, so if you go in the FAR program, the First Aid and Resilience program, there's a page on resources, and I'm sorry if I'll take that recommendation to our web manager. There are steps that can be taken, and in fact we have been working with the European Union Civil Protection Agency, which is called DG ECHO, Directorate General of Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Organization, and as well as partners, civil protection partners in Italy, France, Spain, and also in places like Mali, where we are trying to develop a systematic framework for response and integrating it in the national emergency management systems. And all of these practices are codified in a book called, I think I have, I don't know if I can share my screen now. I showed it in my, let me see if I can get back. And it's called First Aid to Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis, Handbook and Toolkit. And these are codified. And this is now also part of an ISO standard. So this is the book, First Aid to Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis and First Aid to Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis Toolkit. So together, these practices have been codified. We have been offering courses on these basis. Smithsonian has used this book with FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Authority, in their own country to develop a national training called HEART training. So this book has been widely used and is available in multiple languages. And it's free to download, free for download.
That's excellent. So I'm actually looking at it online because I'm curious now. Why did I did not find it? So this is I think I teach actually students about the role of the governments and the role of the civil society to support heritage. And even though in Europe we're very used to having taxpayers' money being allocated to support arts and culture, we still find that in moments of crisis, these structures sort of don't function. As you said, when institutions are dealing with, protecting their families, actually, the staff in institutions are dealing with protecting their families. Second will come maybe, protecting some of the objects if this is possible. But then we need new structures. And these structures that come are generally these international supra-governmental organizations, such as yours. Do you have any? I understand that you work closely with local trainees. So is it that you have areas where you have areas where you train individuals that can then mobilize across the region, and then they themselves help you build this network of trainees that can assist the local communities? Is this the framework where you work with?
That's exactly the framework that we work with. So basically, for example, IHOR, the example that I gave, or the 3 examples that I gave from Yemen, from Syria, and from Ukraine, and also in Estonia, we have Linda, we have professionals everywhere in the world who have been training others. And so that's the network. And by now we have trained 1,000 professionals in 87 countries. And it's very important, as you said, we do need these mechanisms in national emergency management systems. We do need international coordination, but we also need networks on the ground. And in emergency situations, we have to understand that professionals alone cannot do anything. They will have to take into account or enlist the help of local communities, local volunteers. So really, our role is to, that's why we train these cultural first aiders who can then train others and create national teams. And that's how we have been sustaining. And in the past 10 years, we've had 9 international courses, but more than 40 to 50 workshops. And as a result, we have a network in 87 countries.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I'm looking at the audience and at the line just to be sure that I don't miss anybody. Otherwise, I continue with just a couple last questions. We have a couple more minutes. When you are training the trainers, can you maybe describe a little bit the strategy that they will follow? Is it that ICCROM has its best practice on how you should approach, or is it that you go kind of bottom up, asking communities what is it that they most value or most need, or how does that work?
Okay, so our training model is very much the training that we hold is immersive. First of all, the screening itself, we definitely look for people who are dedicated and would like to work in disasters or crisis situations, because it's not everybody can work in such situations. So there is a very careful screening. And after that, we have some online modules in which we introduce, terms, terminologies, because we bring terminology from 3 to 4 sectors. One is the emergency management sector, disaster risk reduction sector, conflict and peace building sector. So we bring all these terminologies together, and the cultural heritage sector. And then after that, we bring them for a 4-week immersive workshop, which is really based on simulations. So the entire 80% of the training is simulation based. And after that, participants are asked to compete, and they apply for seed grants, and they're given small amounts of funding to go and implement similar training or actual field projects like the one I mentioned that is going on in Yemen to safeguard a photo, a recording, a photo as well as a sound archive. This is exactly how we, and then through these projects, through their field projects, they are able to connect with their own local communities as well as their national governments. And we encourage them to form multiple partnerships, to foster these partnerships, intersectoral partnerships. And after that, so it's almost the training itself is given over an 18 months period. And after that, participants get a certificate which certifies that they can work in crisis situations.
And can you mention perhaps what kind of local agencies will be the key partners to foster these intersectional partnerships across the cultural sector? Should we imagine hospitals, or should we imagine what kind of partners?
Well, local Red Cross, civil protection, city governments, disaster risk reduction offices, because it's very important to understand hazards, to understand risks. So the entire, we also give risk assessment methodologies, which are integrated methodologies. So how you can carry out a risk assessment with your city, or how you can build a scenario of a citywide flood, and what would you be doing and what your organization would be doing in a citywide flood. So it's things like that. So obviously, this is not something that heritage sector can, deal with alone. It's a big problem, and that means working with government as well as non-government actors.
And beyond the cultural sector, very much so.
And beyond the cultural sector, and working with local communities. Yeah.
Yeah, so this sounds like quite a humongous work, and so for all of us who don't live in crisis situations, maybe it's time to start enlarging our network of friends and reaching out beyond the cultural sector in case we ever, we could use some of this information. I'm looking for a last question, you guys. No? Well, then with this, I would like to invite you to help me thank Aparna for her presentation on the work of ICCPR. Big applause.